Hello everybody, this is Georgiana with Expressions Craft Studio. So today I'm going to try to do a quick video on showing you my process for making stencils. So let's get into Cricut Design Space, which is the machine that I have. I have a Cricut Explorer and I use Design Space. So you can probably do this in other software like Scan and Cut or Silhouette. I just am not familiar with those, so I cannot tell you how to do those. But today we're going to start with a simple stencil. Now I have a project saved with these two stencil sizes in it, and I've just opened my project. And now I'm going to enter a shape. The shapes are free in Design Space. I don't believe you even have to have a membership or a subscription to get those. I think you can just use Design Space freely. And these shapes come free with it. Now there's other features that you would have to pay for, but these shapes are free. And you can do a lot with these basic shapes. A square, a circle, a triangle, a diamond, and in future videos I'll show you how to cut out some of those different shapes, or to cut and merge, or slice is what the term they use, and weld them together to form new shapes. But for today we're just going to start with a simple diamond. So we're going to select the diamond and we're going to bring it over here and we're going to resize it because that's a little large for my stencils. So I'm going to start it at 1 inch in height, which you can see up here, and I'm just going to keep reducing that until it's about 1/2 inch. So now what I want to do is I want to duplicate this, and I'm going to hit duplicate. We'll do 6. That's probably about all we'll get across there. Then we're going to select all of those by drawing a box around it, holding your mouse key, or in my case the touchpad key, button down. You select them all and you hit align, and you want to align across the bottom is what I want to do. So that moves them all down. Now I'm just going to drag them all over while they're selected and make sure that they fit. They do, and I actually have room for a couple more, so I'm going to do 2 or 3 more. If it's bigger, it'll just cut them out. So I'm going to repeat that process, select them all, align, and align across the bottom. Now you could also align or center horizontally. There's a few other options, but this one worked for me. So yeah, now we've got plenty of diamonds there. Now, maybe those are farther apart than I want them, but for right now we're going to play with this because I did promise a quick video. So while these are all selected, I'm going to duplicate that row, and I'm going to move it over so it's roughly centered. I'm going to group it, and I'm going to go back up and re-grab just this top row and group it. And then I'm going to select all of them. The reason I group them separately is because I want to center them horizontally. Now if I do that right now, it's going to make them line up evenly under one another, which is okay if that's what you're going for. It wasn't actually what I had in mind, so I'm going to click the undo button up here, or you can use Control-Z on your keyboard. And what I want to do is I want to remove one of these diamonds, either the first one or the last one. I don't care which. I'm just going to delete it. And now I'm going to select them all again. I'm going to do align and center horizontally. And you can see that moved the bottom row over just to the left a little bit, so it's more symmetrical. So now with those all selected, I'm going to go ahead and group them just because it makes it a little bit easier for me. And I'm going to duplicate, and I'm going to come over, reposition those, and try to line those up. I think it needs to come down one more maybe. And we're going to do that again. And I'm moving it 5 spaces to the left, and then I'm moving it down to where it looks like it's matching the top. Now it doesn't have to match the top. If you want them closer together, you want some variation in your design, you can certainly do that. I'm just looking for something that's very symmetrical right now. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but when you duplicate an item or a group of items in Design Space, it automatically moves them down 5 spaces and to the right 5 spaces, which is why I just prefer to use my arrows on my keyboard to put them back. And there's other ways you can do it. You can do it manually, then you can use the align buttons, but for me this is just easier because then I can keep my hands right on the keyboard. And 5 isn't that many times to have to hit the arrow to get it lined up the way I want it. So I'm just going to keep doing this until I get this long enough to reach or to fill in all of my stencil panel. And it looks like one more, maybe 2 more might do the trick. So duplicate it again. And that one might be too far. We will see. So one more. And there we go. So now we've got a stencil that will cover this entire panel. And I think everything's grouped together the way I want it, or aligned actually the way I want it. So I'm going to take everything and I'm going to weld it. Now you might want to actually duplicate this. I'll go ahead and do that. And it will take a minute because there's a lot of little pieces there, and that's kind of cool too. You could just select everything now and have a pattern like that. But I'm just going to move this off to the side. I'm going to group it just so it stays together when I move it, so I don't accidentally move just part of it, not the whole thing. And now I'm going to select my original copy and I'm going to weld it. Now I'm going to select my larger template and I'm going to hit duplicate. And now I'm going to just select the panel and drag it over my pattern here. Now I want to select both, so I just make sure that my selection box covers both the panel and the pattern. I'm going to hit align and I'm going to center. And now that it's centered, I'm going to slice. Now I want to drag these slices out of the way, all of the parts that were sliced out of there, out of the way. You can delete those now if you like, which is what I normally do, or you can save them and reuse them, combine them in different ways to make different patterns. So now I'm going to take my stencil frame, sorry, had a little brain fog there, my stencil frame, and just roughly align it around the stencil panel. And I'm going to select both the panel and the frame. I'm going to click align and I'm going to click center. And now I'm going to select weld. And you can see, because of the intricacy of the design, Design Space has some limitations. At times, it is not allowing for these diamonds that were at the top and the bottom. So I'm going to Control Z or undo. I'm going to select everything again. I'm just going to group it because I'm going to be enlarging it. And I want to be able to enlarge both pieces without having to grab them both every time I do it. So this is one way that you can, I guess, trick Design Space into including all of those cuts in your final design. It doesn't always work. Sometimes it helps if you reboot your computer. Sometimes it doesn't. There's a lot of unknowns, at least for me. Maybe somebody has the answer to these questions. I do not. I just know that it doesn't always work. So I'm going to go ahead and try to weld it here. And you can see it still missed some of the diamonds. So I'm going to Control Z to undo that. Since this is all grouped together, I'm going to make this like 50 just to be kind of quick and down and dirty. But I don't know if it'll go to 50. It did. Great. So now I'm going to try weld again. I'm going to minimize my viewing field just to help make it a little easier for me to see. And I'm going to go back up here and see it still didn't work. So that is one of the limitations you have with Design Space. I have not found a way around it yet. Like I said, sometimes rebooting your computer helps. Sometimes it doesn't. We're going to Control Z, which will probably undo my sizing first. Yeah. And now we'll do it again so it undoes the welding. And let's try and make this 100. I don't know if it'll go that high. Never tried it, but it did. That's great. So let's hit weld again. And we'll scroll down to the bottom, which is where we were obviously having problems, and it's still not working. So let's Control Z, and let's select it, and let's just go back to 5, which was the width of our original stencil. And we'll drag it back over here. So this one may not work because of all of the detail in it. I will continue to try working with it to get it to work, but just to give you an idea of how I create the stencil, this is how. Now, the other option you have is I add a tab to mine, is what I want to say. And the reason I add the tab, and this stencil's still way too big, we want that at 5 inches wide. That's more like it. So we're going to zoom back in just so we can see it better. So I like to add a tab to my stencils just because I can put them on a ring and keep them all neatly together and in some kind of order. So I can group all of my diamond, or all my stencils with diamonds, all my stencils with circles. So I can group them all together that way and they stay together. But that's personal preference. You don't have to add the tab. You can just store them in a drawer somewhere flat. I do make mine out of a lot of my mail that I get rather than recycling it. I take a lot of right now it's election propaganda, those little flyers that come in the mail that are kind of plastic coated. They're come in different sizes. You also get them from security companies, and we get some from our real estate agent. Different places will send them out. And I just reuse those. Now you can buy stencil plastic, and I have some of that, and I've used it. But these are free. You're just going to put them in the recycling bin or trash bin if you don't recycle. And why not turn them into something useful? They can always go in the recycle bin later when they have outlived their usefulness. So anyway, I've taken my tab and I've moved it down to where it's just touching the stencil panel. And I've selected both the tab and the panel. And I'm going to hit align, and I'm going to center horizontally. And that just helps put that tab right in the center at the top of that panel. And now you can weld it. And if this had worked correctly, this would be a very pretty stencil, but because of some of the limitations of Design Space, it's not perfect. Now, if you want to make some adjustments to it, you can. If you select the stencil and go into contour, you can take out those ugly bits, those parts that didn't cut correctly or weld correctly. Just take them, click on each one of them and remove them. And then you can exit out of there. And looky there. It's not perfect. You have a much wider border at the top and the bottom than you do on the sides, but it'll work. It's a pretty nice looking stencil. And it's definitely something that we can use. So I'm going to zoom back out just because it's a little easier for me, a little less clicking and dragging. And I'm just going to place this down here for now. So we do have a usable stencil. And if you needed to cover a bigger space with this, once you've stenciled over your artwork, you could pick the stencil up and move it and realign some of these diamonds, whether they'd be top or bottom or left or right, and you could make it bigger that way. So there's one stencil. So let's go and let's play with some of this other stuff we had up here. I'm going to get rid of this piece because it's just got a big hole in the middle. But we can take these two pieces and let's go back and enlarge ourselves a little bit more so we can see that a little bit easier. And you could offset it like that. That kind of gives it an interesting look. Let me zoom in a little bit more. You can kind of see how it's a shadow. Now, it won't necessarily look like a shadow when you stencil your design, but what you could do is use your original stencil and then take it and move it over. So you would put your stencil down, use a darker color on the bottom, and then pick your stencil up and move it just a little bit and put a lighter color on top, and that would give you the shadow effect. Or you can move it off to the side like this and hit weld. Let's do that. Let's just see what that looks like. And you got some interesting little double diamond shapes. It's not terrible. I don't know what I'd use it for, but you know, it's an option. Or we can go back and line it up like this. And let's see if the center horizontal is the one we want. Nope, not quite. That's okay. So what we'll do is we'll just select the top one, and we'll just move it over until we think it's right where we want it, which isn't quite doing it. It's not quite working, but that's okay. We can do it like this. Now, the problem with making this a stencil is where these connections are, they're very fine. They're very tiny. So it may not work really well unless you are using stencil plastic. The paper flyers, plastic coated paper flyers, might struggle with that a bit. But let's go ahead and weld it and just see what we get. Now, if we enlarge it a lot more than 125%, we come back over, you can see they are connected. It's just that how well are they connected, you won't know until you try to cut it out. So that's an option. Let's undo that. And let's zoom back out, or in, a little bit. Let's make that a little smaller is what I mean to say. And let's try just reducing the size of one of these a little bit. And now you might be able to get some kind of different design out of it. Or you can maybe line it up like that. Actually, let's undo, because that gave me another idea. So a lot of people like to design by drawing out what they see in their head initially. I don't necessarily do that because ideas are always coming at me. I'd never get anything created because I'd constantly be drawing. But I kind of like the way that looks. So let's weld that together. And that gives you an interesting little diagonal design that might come in handy for something. I think if those were rounded squares or diamonds instead of such sharp points, it would look a little bit more appealing to me. But again, to each his own. You know, we're all creative. Now, this would be another one that would look good if you put your dark color down first and then just move the stencil over a bit, realigned it, so to speak, and then put a lighter color on top or a contrasting color on top. And that would give you more of a, well, it would look more like this. So let's see. I don't think there's too much else. That's not too bad. Let's try weld that and see what we think of that. Oh, I actually kind of like that one. So I think we're going to keep that one. So I'm going to zoom back down to a smaller view just so that I can grab things easier. I'm going to make another copy of my stencil template and duplicate it. There, I've grabbed it and I've duplicated it. Now I'm going to bring this all over and I'm going to move the panel on top of the design roughly. I'm going to select both. I'm going to align and then center. And then I'm going to slice. Now we may have problems and we may not. It's always kind of a crapshoot, so to speak. So with some stencils, you can actually use both the positive and the negative. This isn't one of those, and the reason is because you'll have floating pieces that won't work, and I don't know a better way to describe that. If you tried cutting one out, you'd see for yourself really quickly why it wouldn't work. But basically, if I put my frame around this, all of these little squares or double squares, or double diamonds, I should say, would just pop out. They would just fall off your stencil because they're not attached to anything. That white space is free space or negative space, and they're not attached to anything. The only ones that would still show up are the ones that are going to weld to the border on the outside. Those are the only ones that would remain attached to your frame. So this one won't work. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And I honestly never know until I see them whether or not they're going to work. So I'm going to just delete that one. As pretty as it is, it's not going to work for us. And we're going to align these, kind of get these in the same area. Select them both, align, center, and we're going to weld, and we're going to hope it welds everything without losing bits. And it did. Oh, I'm excited because I wasn't sure. The first one didn't work correctly, so I didn't know. So now we've grabbed our tab, and we're going to place it right on top. We just want it barely touching. The more it touches, the less of the tab that you lose, so just keep that in mind. But you do want it to touch just ever so much. So you're going to select the tab and the stencil. You're going to hit align and center horizontally. That moves that tab into the center, and now you can weld it. And there you go. You've got a lovely little stencil, which kind of looks like a lattice. I really like that. So we're going to keep that. So that is how an easy, down and dirty way to make stencils. And like I said, you do not have to use paid shapes or the ones that come with a subscription. You can use these free shapes, and you can make a lot of different stencils with those free shapes. You don't have to put a tab on them. You can make your stencils whatever size you like. If you like working with slimline cards, you might want to make a much taller, narrower stencil than what I've created here. However, with this particular two patterns, you could align those really easily or realign them to recreate the design, but you might want your stencil to look more like this. So it's really up to you, the size that you make them. The bigger you can make just nothing but large ones, and use them on anything, or you can create different sizes for different things. Anyway, there you have it. There are the two stencils that we created that we're going to keep. And so now what I'm going to do is, because I do want to keep those, I'm going to delete these. I like to move my images up to the top corner so that I can find them easier. Apparently I didn't get it all the way to the top. There we go. Nope, still didn't. So get it all the way up there. And now I'm going to save. And I'm going to do a save as, because I had opened my project with my template in it, and I don't want to lose that. But I see something back here that I don't need, so I'm going to get rid of that so I don't confuse the situation later. So now I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to do a save as. Like I said, I want to rename this. So my naming convention is ECS for Expressions Craft Studio. I'm working on stencils, so I'm going to leave that. I'm changing this from template to diamond. And I've got 5x7 with a tab, and I'm going to change this to a 2 because there are 2 stencils. I like to know how many are in my projects. That's all completely unnecessary. If you're just doing this for yourself and you don't plan on sharing with anybody, and you're not going to be making lots and lots of them like I do, then you probably don't need to do this. But because you can go in and search for different elements of the name when you're looking later, this will come in handy for me. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to save that. And there you go. It tells me it was saved. Your project gives me the name of the project was saved successfully. So I've created 2 diamond stencils in under 30 minutes. And there you go. So I hope you learned something. This really is more probably for either Cricut newbies or people who are just not used to, maybe don't realize what they can do with free shapes and how they can create some of their own artwork. There's so many products out there for sale for crafters, especially for paper crafters, card makers right now. Between stamps and stencils and all of the paints and inks and various products, you can go broke easily buying all that stuff, when some of it you can make for yourself. And I'm going to continue showing in my series of videos ways that you can save a little bit of money, where you don't always have to go out and buy something in order to make something. I've made my own alcohol inks. Now, they're not as vibrant as the inks you can purchase. They're definitely nowhere near as vibrant as pinata inks or even the Tim Holtz inks. But depending on what I'm doing with them, they work just fine. If I want to watercolor with them, they work pretty good. So you can do a lot of stuff with stuff that you have around the house without having to go out and buy things. Now, I've bought a lot of stuff, but I've also been crafting my whole life. I'm 56 years old, going to be 57 in a couple months. And so I've literally been collecting craft items for almost 40 years. So I've got a lot of stuff to work with, and that's part of what I want to show you is just kind of how to work with with what you have, because I know a lot of people like me, they kind of bounce from one craft to another, and they collect a lot of stuff along the way, and you just don't have to go out and buy stuff all the time. I told you I made my own alcohol inks. I've also made my own little misty, what do you call them? Glimmer sprays, I think is what somebody calls them. So there's different things that you can do with products you have in your home that don't require you going out and spending a lot of money. And that's my goal here. It's just to show you how to save a little bit of money. And this way you can get exactly what you want and create the way you want to create. So I'm going to let you go for now, and I will see you in my next video, hopefully. Don't forget to give a thumbs up if you like the video. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and feel free to join my Expressions Craft Studio page on Facebook, and I hope I see you again.